Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today, I'm just going to go ahead and not do that thing where I alternate videos when working on a series and give you the next installment of what I decided halfway through the second video would be called the Just Look Up series. I'm so good at this whole planning thing, am I right? Anyway, I teased their explanation of gravity at the end of the last one, so let's jump in and find out what that is.
Whatever's coming from the government, I need the kind of evidence that would shut down a case. If I don't see the evidence, why would I believe it?
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next one.
All right, starting off strong with a quote mine. That was Neil's funny ha-ha answer to the question, right before he went on to describe that we can model how gravity works, we can measure it, we can make predictions with it, etc., etc. You know what? Let's just let Neil say it.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
No, here's the difference. We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things. We can measure it, predict with it. But when you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know.
He then went on to describe Einstein's idea of gravity being the curvature of space-time, where matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move. So, no, we don't know exactly what gravity is per se, or what its ultimate cause is, but we do know that it is a real thing that exists because it behaves in such a predictable manner.
So you're telling me gravity is strong enough to hold oceans onto it, battling inertia from the spin?
You know that inertia is only a problem during acceleration, right? We're not accelerating. Well, I mean, changing direction is technically a form of acceleration, so rotating around the outside of a sphere would be accelerating, but given the size of the Earth, the direction change happens slowly enough that the force of gravity can indeed overcome the inertia caused by the 15 degrees of rotation per hour. To put that in perspective, a rough way of estimating degrees would be to look at the sky and hold your hand out at arm's length and make the rock-on gesture. The distance between your pinky and your index finger will be roughly 15 degrees. Now, obviously, everyone's hand sizes are a bit different, so this isn't exact, but it's close enough. If there were a star directly above you, it would take 1 hour for it to appear to travel that short distance, because that's how long it takes for the Earth to rotate by that amount. So yes, the speed at which the surface of the Earth is turning relative to a hypothetical stationary object in space does sound really, really fast, about 460 meters per second at the equator, but the Earth is so big that this speed ends up being relatively slow from the perspective of someone on the surface. And yes, I am aware that relativity makes my use of the word stationary here more than a bit dubious, but please bear with my simplification for the sake of this example.
So gravity's holding oceans, and inertia's trying to pull it out and make it fling. Skyscrapers would fling off the Earth, but this gravity's holding these. It's so strong, it's holding these, but it can't hold a helium balloon.
They actually kind of sort of figure out the balloon thing. Well, halfway figure out. We'll get to it. But yeah, change all your graphics to be representing a ball which turns at a rate of 15 degrees per hour rather than those ridiculously fast rates of turn, and then come back and tell me how that rate of rotation was enough to fling objects from its surface. Now, of course, the gravity of the Earth will likely overwhelm any forces that might cause the water to stick to your slowly rotating ball, but at least you'll see that it doesn't get flung off like you're picturing with the oceans of the Earth.
Things that are less dense go up, things that are more dense go down. Has nothing to do with gravity.
And there it is, the flat Earth explanation for gravity. Things that are less dense go up, things that are more dense go down. So tell me, how exactly do these things know which way is up and which way is down? Without gravity, which direction is up? The buoyant force is directly related to gravity. Essentially, in a fluid here being in the fluid dynamic sense rather than the state of matter sense, so air is a fluid for the purposes of buoyancy, but in a fluid, the pressure at a given depth is determined by the weight of all the fluid that is above that depth being pulled down by gravity. Buoyancy is when an object that is less dense than the fluid is pushed up by the mere fact of the pressure of the surrounding fluid. The fluid closes in around it, and in much the same way as squeezing one of those water wiggler snake toy things will cause it to shoot out of your hand, the squeezing of the less dense object in the fluid causes it to be pushed upward. This squeezing is literally caused by gravity, so there would be no upward push if there were no gravity. And also, I am oversimplifying to the point of error here. It's not so much density as displacement, which is basically a function of density, and it can be affected by shape, etc. So my point here is that there is no buoyancy without gravity, and there is no up or down without gravity. So buoyancy would not be able to make things go up or down.
Where's gravity at with butterflies? You would think that if gravity's so strong it's holding skyscrapers down to it, we would be flat on the ground.
No, that's not how it works. There isn't some force looking to throw everything off the face of the Earth that gravity has to overcome, and being able to overcome that force with skyscrapers means that it would squish us. And also, keep in mind that gravity pulls on everything equally. A feather and a bowling ball, when dropped in a vacuum, both accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared, which actually serves to illustrate another problem with explaining gravity in terms of buoyancy. Even if everything you said was correct, why do things in vacuum chambers still fall down toward the Earth? Since there's nothing else in the chamber with it, shouldn't it be in the flat Earth equivalent of 0g?
Long before the theory of gravity was a glimmer in Newton's imagination, the natural physics of density and buoyancy already perfectly explained why apples fall down.
That's actually a good example of how people can use imperfectly understood science to still model how the world works with the hopes of improving the model with better understanding in the future. Archimedes figured out buoyancy, and that was most definitely a long time before Newton developed his theory of gravity, and as I said, buoyancy relies on gravity to work. So how did he figure it out? Well, Archimedes knew that objects have weight, and Archimedes' principle is all about weight. The strength of the buoyant force acting upon an object is equal to the weight of the fluid that the object displaces. So Archimedes was answering a different question than Newton. He wasn't asking why objects have weight, he was asking why some objects float in water and others sink. You don't need to know that gravity is the reason behind why objects have weight, you just need to be able to measure their weight. Then fast forward about 1800 years and we get Galileo dropping things off the Tower of Pisa and discovering that objects of different weight fall at the same rate, something that is definitely not true of buoyancy. And then fast forward another century or so and we get Newton doing thought experiments with apples falling straight down and comparing that to cannonballs flying in an arc across the sky, resulting in his formulation of a theory of gravity.
Objects fall or rise based on their relative density to the medium surrounding them.
If that were the case, then they would not all accelerate downward at 9.8 meters per second squared regardless of their density. A solid steel ball the same size and texture of a golf ball would fall faster than an actual golf ball if buoyancy were the reason for the fall. And you can test this for yourself by dropping two such objects into water and watching as the more dense one sinks faster than the less dense one.
Apples fall because they are denser than the air, while helium balloons rise because they are lighter.
No gravity necessary.
Well, I mean, you kinda let it slip at the end there. Apples fall because they are more dense, while helium balloons rise because they are lighter. Now, how can something be lighter than something else without a force pulling down on them to give them weight in the first place?
This is why raindrops fall down through the air and air bubbles rise up through water. Everything seeks its relative density and rises or falls until settling accordingly.
I still want to know why up is up and down is down in this model. It makes zero sense with no gravity.
The natural physics of density and buoyancy was understood and agreed upon for centuries before they changed our textbooks and started NASA.
Yep, that's right. Everyone agreed on buoyancy and density as the cause of what we call gravity today, right up until NASA started around the time that Newton developed his theory of gravity. NASA's been around since the 1700s? Oh, what else was that? Science textbooks weren't even a thing until the 19th century? Something's not quite adding up here.
All our space information is coming from NASA. Werner von Braun was the director of all 6 moon missions, and he's a... Is that not a comic book?
Okay, they bleeped it, and then my noise removal software that I've used to get rid of their obnoxious background music muddied it a bit so it's hard to hear, but he's going full Godwin here. Von Braun was a Nazi, and he was in charge of a lot of stuff at NASA for the moon missions, therefore the Earth is flat and the moon missions were a hoax. Like, say what you will about Operation Paperclip, which was when the US poached a bunch of Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians at the end of World War II, but your opinion of this decision has no bearing on whether or not the Earth is round, if we went to the moon, if the ISS is currently in orbit, etc., etc., etc. Also, for the record, yes, I did run it through noise removal software, and that is why their voice sounds weird at some times, but surprisingly, they're actually easier to understand in this version than when the music is there. It's wild.
Come from this big bang and fluffy puffy pixie fairy dust and unicorn farts, and all of a sudden consciousness just came out of that. No, it was designed. It's not an accident.
I just can't with these Chirons. Oh my god. For those keeping track, we've now seen a tattooer, a master of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, well, the creator of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I guess, and now we've got a musician slash astrotheologist. Like, what the fuck even is an astrotheologist? How does one engage in the study of astrotheology? This sounds like something out of the Golden Compass. Or maybe Discworld. Did these guys read a bunch of Terry Pratchett and manage to miss out on the fact that it was fiction? That would explain a lot here.
Everything according to the bogus Darwinian theory of evolution.
Well, someone got body slammed by the Kent Hovind School of Creationism. Darwinian evolution has nothing to do with the Big Bang, the origin of the solar system, or abiogenesis. Like, at all.
All of it points to a godless, atheist, demonic, demon-crat lie.
Is it atheist or demonic? I feel like those two are mutually exclusive. I mean, I guess there's probably a handful of people out there who believe in demons without believing in God, but I don't think that's a very common position.
NASA is a corporation, and they are the same people who run Disney.
Of course, NASA runs Disney. Come on, man, have you not been paying attention? If anyone runs anyone, it's the other way around. Disney owns NASA. Disney owns all. All hail our mousy overlords.
In fact, they are very, very similar, because what they do is they entertain people. They're not teaching people.
NASA employs a lot more scientists, researchers, engineers, etc. than Disney does, and far fewer actors. So I don't really think they're the same. I mean, as you pointed out earlier in this video, the quote-unquote actors who supposedly went to the moon were really bad at acting. In fact, my brother actually works for a company that makes satellite parts. Now, I don't know which space agency or company the satellites are for, but there is a non-zero chance that it's NASA. So, no matter what, in a flat Earth world, it would have to be someone who fakes their stuff that my brother works for. So, is my brother's job fake? Are they paying him to keep quiet about it as well? This list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Turns out my brother's an actor and I had no idea.
They don't want people to know the truth about the cosmos. They're entertaining them with CGI images.
How'd they get the CGI onto my telescope? I've seen Saturn for myself with my own eyes. I've seen Jupiter and its moons myself. Venus, Mars, comets, the ISS, though that one wasn't through my telescope because I'm not great at aiming it, so I guess they got my binoculars as well. And I don't even have a great telescope. If you Google the model for my telescope, you'll find advertisements for it claiming that it's the best thing ever, reviews on the sales websites talking about how awesome it is, and then professional reviewers pointing out that it's actually one of the worst consumer-grade telescopes you can get. Probably the reason for this mixture is that it's very small for what it can accomplish, and it's a lot better than those like $50 kids telescopes. So if you grew up with one of those pieces of garbage, then moving up to this one is a massive improvement. But serious amateur astronomers avoid it like the plague. Anyway, I'm off topic. My point is that it doesn't take state-of-the-art equipment to see this stuff for yourself.
Every image you see, image, not photo, every single one of them, all of those are computer-generated image.
Well, if you don't trust the images that you find, why don't you just buy a decent telescope and take some photos for yourself? It's not hard to do.
They are not photos. Everyone you see on Google is a CGI image. It is not a photo.
Just gonna take a guess here, but maybe if you worked on using better search terms, you'd find actual photos? It's hard to read, but they search for planets from outer space. I'm not sure where else a planet would be from, so I assume that this is them wanting the perspective of the photo to be from outer space, which is a weird caveat given that you can see planets for yourself from Earth, but let's just roll with it. So you want photos? Well, how about we try adding the keyword photo to the search and see what comes up? Well, if we search for photos of Pluto, the first pictures that come up are photos of Pluto taken by New Horizons. How about photos of Saturn? Well, the first thing that comes up for that are a bunch of photos from Saturn, usually from Cassini, because it spent so long in orbit just sending back pictures from pretty much any angle you could want. There's also a pretty nifty picture that Hubble got of Saturn back in 2020. If what you guys have said earlier in the video is any indication, you trust Hubble more than you trust other satellites, so that should be some evidence for you right there. And you can keep doing this for whatever planet you want. Also worth mentioning is that we do live in a time when the vast majority of pictures taken are taken digitally, and so the distinction between the words image and photo are largely meaningless by now.
Your mind has been indoctrinated, it has been brainwashed, and you've been duped, and you still believe in Santa Claus and the upside-down spinning Santa ball, which the Jesuits invented in 1542.
Oh yes, of course. The Jesuits invented the Santa Ball testicular Earth model in 1542. That's why Plato was teaching a globe Earth almost 1,000 years earlier. And that's just the earliest good records we have for someone teaching a globe Earth. There is evidence that Pythagoras or Parmenides were teaching a Santa Ball testicular Earth before that, with Parmenides having the stronger claim, but Pythagoras having the better name recognition because of the whole triangle thing. So, how were these ancient Greek guys teaching a thing that wasn't invented until 1542? Did someone invent and then forget about time travel, and that's how this gets resolved? Because, I mean, you guys are aware of the ancient Greeks. You mentioned them earlier in this video.
Prior to 1542, every single culture, all our intelligent ancestors will be rolling in their graves knowing that their stupid progeny actually think they live on a spinning globe that people bow down to.
Dude, you're spending a lot of time just calling the idea of a round Earth stupid and throwing insults at people who believe that. It doesn't make you look good. Maybe try reason and evidence? Preferably better evidence than what I've seen so far, but I mean, hey, it's hard to bring good evidence to the table when some very basic observations that anyone is capable of are all it takes to debunk your whole thing, so I guess insults are really all you have.
Zoom up to Venus, zoom up to Mars, and you will see they are lights. They are stars. Hence, all the intelligent pre-Copernican astrologers, Ptolemaic astrologers like myself, taught that all the planets are wandering stars. They are luminous bodies.
Okay, maybe if you digitally zoom into a video of Mars or Venus taken with insufficient optical magnification, that's what they look like. But seriously, my crappy telescope that I mentioned earlier is less than $300. Surely you can afford that. If you spend some time on an astronomy forum first, you can probably get a recommendation for a much better scope in that same price range. I really don't know what to tell you here, man. Just look at the damn things for yourself. But, like, properly, not by zooming in on a camera phone or whatever you did to get that grainy footage you're showing now.
If all the stars, as they say, in every constellation are all at different depths by millions of light years, how come for thousands and thousands and thousands of years of hurtling through the sky, there is no distortion, no difference in luminosity of stars?
I assume that when he's talking about distortion here, he's not talking about something like redshift, which is actually caused by the expansion of space in between the stars rather than the movement of the stars themselves, and is instead talking about the constellations changing shape over time. Because the answer to why the stars haven't moved much in the sky over the last few thousand years really is quite simple, and it's right there in the question that you asked. It's because they are really, really far away. Relative to the distances between the stars, the Earth doesn't move very fast, even if it sounds fast to us. And so it would take a really long time from the human perspective for the stars to change position noticeably. But we actually have enough data on the motion of over 2 million stars at this point that the ESA has been able to put together a video of their projected motion in the future. Each frame of the video is approximately equivalent to 750 years. The constellations are all completely unrecognizable in the video just after a handful of frames, roughly 100,000 years. So yeah, the stars do move, and they move very, very fast, but the distances involved are so vast and our lives are so comparatively short that they seem all but stationary to us.
We're supposed to be traveling at, get this number in your head, 66,600 mile an hour, 666.
Close, but that was actually 66600, not 666. So you're only off by 2 orders of magnitude. But it's also the wrong number. Like, it's not even close. The Earth orbits the Sun at about 67,000 miles per hour, or 107,000 kilometers per hour, so not 66,600. And the whole solar system is orbiting the center of the galaxy at about 448,000 miles per hour, or 720,000 kilometers per hour. And of course, relativity mucks this all up. These measurements have to be taken from a frame of reference of one kind or another. The Earth is moving around the Sun at 107,000 kilometers per hour in the Sun's frame of reference, which would make the Sun stationary. But the Sun is not stationary, and different numbers can be arrived at for the speed of the Sun's orbit around the galaxy depending on what we use as a frame of reference. So I am willing to concede that there might be a frame of reference which ends up with the Sun appearing to move at your 66,600 miles per hour, but it wasn't any of the numbers that I found, so to get that number you'd likely have to resort to some trickery, and given what I've seen of this video so far, I think you're probably too lazy for that, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume that you made it up out of whole cloth until such a time as you show your work or your source.
That's why we have a horizon, because it's horizontal.
Oh god. No, we don't have a horizon because the horizon is horizontal. We have the word horizontal to describe things in relation to the horizon. A horizon which would not exist in a flat Earth, at least not anywhere near in the same way as we have it today. In a flat Earth, the thing that would limit visibility would be actual physical things getting in the way rather than being separated by a curve. So, on a globe, when you watch a ship sail off into the distance, it eventually disappears from the bottom up as it goes over the curve. If you wait until the ship has just disappeared and then climb a stepladder, you'll be able to see the ship again, because your higher elevation allows you to see farther around the curve. This would not be the case on a flat Earth. You'd be able to see it until something else got in the way. Elevation would have nothing to do with it.
That's why we have sea level, because the sea is level.
Do you know why the sea is level? Because the Earth is really, really big, so for all intents and purposes, it's basically level. Because water is fluid, gravity pulls it down, it fills the basins, and the equilibrium point is the elevation that we know as sea level. My question is, why can't we see across the sea? There's nothing in the way, nothing about light indicates that it wouldn't travel all the way across the sea if there were no obstructions. So why do those bridges disappear into the distance? Why can't we see where they go?
It's not curving. You cannot call it sea level. You will call it sea curve.
Again, just to reiterate, the Earth is big. So big that large bodies of water appear to be flat. And really, if we want to be pedantic, sea level is referring to elevation, so it should be sea elevation. Level in this case is not referring to flatness, but the height. In the same way that you might, in a hotel lobby, refer to the mezzanine level. It's referring to a specific height above the ground floor, not saying that the mezzanine is level. Though the mezzanine should also be level in that sense of the word, or the building will definitely have some issues.
That's why we have tectonic plates and not tectonic balls.
My God, you're right! We named something slightly inaccurately, therefore everything we know about science is completely and utterly wrong. Really, though, the reason we don't call them tectonic balls is because they aren't balls. And really, tectonic balls sounds super painful. You should probably see a doctor if you've got tectonic balls. Or maybe smush them together and see the mountains form. Oh, that's gross. I can't... No. Next topic, don't do that. So the tectonic plates, if you look at the geometry of the entire plate as a whole, are roughly convex. They are wrapped around the outside of the Earth. So if we were to think of something fairly commonplace that has that shape, what would that be? Tectonic toques? Tectonic beer bellies? Tectonic blanket with a cat under it? I can't really think of much that has that sort of shape that would work for a name. Oh, wait a minute. I just thought of something. How about plate armor? You know, that armor that is made of steel plates that are contoured to fit around the softer shape of the body underneath and overlap each other and are a really good analogy for tectonic plates? So maybe tectonic plates would work as a name. At any rate, this is simply arguing from terminology. There are plenty of things out there with weird names that don't actually reflect reality. This would be akin to arguing that the existence of a species of newt known as the Klingon newt is evidence for the existence of actual Klingons from Star Trek. Or, to use a more apt comparison, it would be the same as if I were to claim that the fact that the atmosphere is called the atmosphere rather than the atmo-flat is evidence for the sphericity of the Earth, which would be ridiculous.
And to all those astrologers out there who think they are astrologers,
Do you mean astronomers? Because all it takes to be an astrologer is a penchant for writing vaguely worded statements that have the appearance of specificity, but are actually so general as to apply to most people to at least some degree. Such statements are known as Barnum statements, and basically every horoscope is made up completely of these types of statements. Things like, disciplined and self-controlled outside, you tend to be worrisome and insecure inside. That's the kind of thing that if you aren't already aware that pretty much everybody feels that way, it will feel super specific to you. But yeah, I wouldn't exactly expect an astrotheologist to know the difference between an astrologer and an astronomer.
Teaching heliocentrism, like Laura Eisenhower, the granddaughter of her grandfather.
Yup, she sure was the granddaughter of her grandfather. I'll let you in on a little secret here. I am actually the grandson of my grandmother. Shocking, I know. Also, I know it's easy enough to misspeak, so I'm willing to overlook it, but just for clarity, her great-grandfather was Dwight Eisenhower, not her grandfather.
The President of the US.
Okay, I cut in there and was being a bit cheeky because of how he phrased it, but did he really just name Laura Eisenhower but forget which president she is the great-granddaughter of? Like, even if you forget his first name is Dwight, you can get away with just saying President Eisenhower. We'll know who you're talking about. But also, Laura Eisenhower is, to quote her website, a global alchemist, researcher, and medical and intuitive astrologist. Learn the Oxford comma. That's a messy sentence right there. So I guess he really was talking about astrologers and not astronomers earlier, so my bad. Did I just stumble into a bad guy fight? Because I will happily just sit back and eat some popcorn while watching the Flat Earthers duke it out with the global alchemist astrologers. Also, read the rest of Laura's bio sometime. It's a trip. Never have I read so much which contains so little actual information. So she's a good astrologer, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just skip the bit where he uses his bullshit to argue against someone else's bullshit. I will just say, though, that his issue with astrology seems to be that they never factor the movement of the Earth into their calculations, and as bullshit as astrology is, I will point out that the zodiac are the constellations that are in the path of the ecliptic. That is, they are lined up with the Earth's orbit around the sun. As such, they are only visible during certain times of the year, as the night sky of the Earth will be pointing in different directions. The existence of the constellations that astrologers use is a direct result of the Earth moving around the sun, so whatever else you can say about astrology, you can't say that they ignore the motion of the Earth. Also, fun fact, but there are 13 ecliptic constellations, but the zodiac only uses 12. Do you know why? It's because the stars were in different positions when the zodiac was first described, and the 13th constellation did not exist as we see it today. So the astrologers lose because they can't adapt to new constellations as they appear, as that would mess with their established system, and the flat earthers lose because they refuse to admit that the Earth or the stars move in the first place.
Speaking of horizons, some guy, he filmed a mountain.
Some guy. Nice. That's always the best source for highly accurate scientific information. Some guy.
He was flying over Texas, and he used his camera to film a mountain. This mountain was supposed to be hidden by 35 miles of curvature.
What was his elevation when he filmed it? You need to know that in order to calculate the distance that the horizon would be at. What was his exact location? Did the video include geolocation data? Some guy flying over Texas is not anywhere near specific enough. Where in Texas? Texas is a big-ass state. What were the weather conditions at the time? The mountain you're showing is across a gulf, or rather a gulf, as this video has labeled it, which means that we are seeing it right by water. In the right weather conditions, heat rising off the water can cause light that is heading toward it to curve upward and reflect rather than hitting the water, which then creates a mirage image. One of my favorite examples of this is the boating scene from the Pierce Brosnan remake of the Thomas Crown Affair. The shot of the New York City skyline is a mirage. They were too far out to be able to see it, but the weather conditions were perfect for creating mirages, and so they got a brilliant example captured on film. So not only do we have grainy, low-quality footage taken from who knows where at who knows what elevation by who knows who, but it's right in front of a large body of water which could easily account for what is seen even if it were 35 miles past the horizon, as is being claimed here.
As soon as flat earthers found out about P900 cameras that are made by Nikon, where they can zoom in times 80, I think.
83 times optical zoom, to be precise.
And what's going on is, like, you can see a boat disappear with your naked eye. And that used to be proof alone. That used to be proof for the curvature of the earth. But now you can watch the boat disappear with your naked eye. And then you could pull up this camera and you could zoom in on the boat that you just watched disappear. And you could bring it right back into full view, just perfectly visible.
I like that the video they have for that doesn't actually show that happening. It just zooms in on a boat that is far away. But also, I find it fascinating that these flat earthers are willing to drop at least $700 for a used P900, but they aren't willing to invest a similar amount of money into things like telescopes that have been around for ages. Hell, if you want to cheap out, this $100 telescope here that is undoubtedly a piece of garbage will get you about 90 times zoom with a 3mm eyepiece. The P900 was not the first piece of equipment to ever achieve these types of magnification. They just had some pretty good marketing. It's not even a great camera. When you buy it, you're mostly paying for the gimmick of the super zoom, which most people will not realistically be using regularly.
There's flat earth proofs coming out all the time, every other day, it's just a matter of if you can find it or not, if it's going to surface in the right areas where people can share it.
Well, if there really are so many such proofs, then you'd think they could have chosen to go with some of their good ones for this video, right? Like, if I were putting together an hour-long video attempting to prove a point, I would make my point with the very best evidence that I had access to. If the person who made this video has a similar thought process, then that means that this is the best he's got. And that's not saying much. Well, this is where I'll leave it for today. I'll take a break from this one for next week, and then I'll finish it off in one more video, and probably won't touch Flat Earth again, at least for a little while. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Kaiser94, who says, "The cameras mean nothing for two reasons. One, the moon landings could be faked by technology of the time. Anyone knows that the US and NASA were desperate to get any kind of victory against the Russians. And two, there is something called the Wells Belt, that ever since the moon landing, no other country's spaceship has done in high orbit, maybe because they would know that they would fry by the radiation." Well, Kaiser, I would dispute the ability to fake the moon landing as well as they apparently did in 1969. I've seen movies from that era. The special effects can be impressive for what they were, but they are completely obviously fake, especially by today's standards. So you're going to need to do better than a handful of lens flares that are claimed to be reflections from the wires and whatnot in order to debunk the footage from the moon. And by the Wells Belt, I assume you mean the Van Allen radiation belts? Those names aren't exactly close, but I can't find anything astronomical with the name Wells Belt. But the Van Allen belts are perfectly real, and we knew about them before Apollo. That's actually how the astronauts survived. The missions were timed and courses plotted in such a way as to minimize the astronauts' exposure to the radiation. And radiation exposure is actually what will likely be the limiting factor in any future Mars missions. The two options that we have to protect against radiation are to move very, very quickly to minimize exposure, as they did with the Apollo missions, or to have an adequately shielded craft. Now, the problem with shielding, though, is that it's kind of an all-or-nothing scenario. If the shielding isn't perfect, then any radiation that slips through will be trapped inside, reflecting over and over again, potentially making the exposure worse than if there were just no shielding. But manned moon missions are planned in the not-too-distant future. Artemis is currently aiming for 2025, if I'm not mistaken, but I wouldn't be surprised if that got pushed back a few years. But it's not like we haven't sent people because it's impossible, it's just massively impractical in most cases. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, iOS Tilt Bill Gamer, Clench Eastwood, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, Mark Hetcham, and all the rest, who are the zoom lens to the P900 that is my channel. If you'd like to be less powerful than a child's discount telescope, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist. Links to social media, all the ways to support the channel, and to my other projects can be found at links.vicerhino.com. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! Her great-grandfather was Dwight Eisenhower. Who is Dwight Eisenhower?